Hello, everybody, and welcome to the channel. Today I'm joined by Matt from Mantic Games, in charge of the studio, keeping everything running shipshape and Bristol fashion.
Well, you say that.
Well, yeah, at least gives the illusion. It's the swan motif. Everything up top is all graceful, and then mad paddling below the line.
Yeah.
But the reason we are joined by Matt today is to talk about this exciting development, which is Warpath.
Absolutely.
Now, if people aren't familiar with it, second edition, sort of the first proper edition, came out back in 2016, and it's a massed sci-fi game, sort of the ilk of Kings of War, where you have big bases of teams within units that fight out these epic games on the tabletop, and you've decided to sort of come back and not just revisit the rule set, but also shake it up. Do you want to give us a bit of a brief on where you're coming from then?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we already had Deadzone, which is a skirmish-based sci-fi game, and then Ronnie had an idea for a massive mass battle sci-fi experience, which in his mind was Warpath. So it'd be 28 mil on movement trays, and tons and tons of models. I think when it went to Kickstarter, there was a feeling, certainly from the community, that actually a better scale for 28 mil is somewhere in between those two. It's not mass battles, because you don't want to do that every on a games evening or a club night. You don't want to be bringing out your entire collection to play. You want to play something that you can play in 2 hours. So somewhere between mass battles and your Deadzone skirmish stuff. So you want some platoons, some squads, a couple of vehicles, that kind of thing. So during that Warpath Kickstarter, that's where Firefight first came from. It was that game in the middle. And actually, Firefight became the more popular of the two. So while I could both use the models, and we had the rule sets for both, I think most people felt that big mass battle experience at 28 mil was great for, once every 3 months, you and your mates get everything out and play on a massive 12-foot table and everything else. But it would have been much better if it had been the mass battle is at a smaller scale and plays in that hour and a half, 2 hours that you would expect for an evening game or a tournament or something like that.
Yeah.
So given that we'd gone back last year and revisited Firefight, updated the rules, and using all of that tooling that the Kickstarter had given us, and said, okay, right, that is now Firefight, and obviously some Deadzone in there as well. But that's Firefight tooling. What do we do with Deadzone? Or what do we do with Warpath rather? So Warpath is obviously it's the universe, so it's the Warpath universe. So all these things are set in it. But we still wanted to have that big experience. So we said, well, okay, we've been a 28 millimeter company, war games company, but there's no reason why we can't, we're as a war games company and miniatures company, make miniatures, make them small, and then we can address that. This is what Warpath scale should always have looked like and felt like. Let's do that game.
Yeah. And to give people a bit of an idea, this popped up as a little bit of a tease with an enforcer and a strider kicking forward in both 28 and is it 15 mil? Because I've seen a few scales sort of banded.
It's I mean those aren't actual 12 sculpts. So those are the STLs for the the enforcer and the strider STL shrunk down to the sizes. That's us testing the size that we want, that we felt was best. So the one that I'm aiming for at the minute is I've taken an enforcer, which is 36 mil to the top of the head, taken it down to 12 mil to the top of the head. Okay. So actually, it's probably about
a 10 mil,
about 11 to the eyes. They're slightly taller than a human, so it's probably roughly 10 mil. It's not. I haven't been exact. I've taken them down. I've scaled them to what I think is an appropriate size, and the vehicles actually scale slightly smaller. Because otherwise they're too big. You're not going to get them on the plastics frames and stuff like that, which is what I was anticipating we would be doing.
Yeah. Well, I think that brings us to the big point then, because you were obviously pushing, and there's been a lot of development in the background on this, on scales and play testing had changed the system. So the idea was to go for a grander scale game at a smaller footprint, shall we say, rather than keep using the word scale over and over. And then obviously within the gaming community will know that another game was about to be resurrected and it was touted around. So at this point, you've decided to go back to the community and ask the question: is a small scale Warpath something that people would like to be involved in, would get involved and start playing?
Yeah, so we got as far as working out what a 2-player set might look like, what the based on our standard frame sizes, what plastic could we fit on there, what would that translate to in terms of contents for a 2-player set. How would that then replicate across for this army, for this army, for this army, for the different factions? We'd looked at rules, we play tested rules. I'd sourced a scenery range that we were adding our own. It was already an established small-scale plastic scenery range that I'd got some stuff sculpted in our battle zones, Deadzone style, that fitted into it, so it all tied into the world. So that had all been sorted, and then Alessio had come on, and we were looking at the rules together and playtesting together, making refinements, working out how we wanted armies to be constructed, all that sort of stuff. And we'd looked at the first 4 factions because we wanted to go just beyond those, and we'd also looked at beyond the kind of the infantry and the tanks that we're expecting, which are the ones that are already in Firefight. This gives you the opportunity to explore new things, because it's you haven't got a massive investment to make a huge new tank or something like that. You can concept sketch it and make it quite small. So new ideas for new tanks, and again, these are just shrunk down scale testing and base size testing. So these are shrunk down 28mm versions, but they still look pretty cool. Just to start testing scale and stuff. But beyond that, it's like, well, what tanks can these guys have? What size can those be? Do we want super heavies? Yes, we do. What does that mean for Plague? What does that mean for Asterians? What does that mean for Enforcers if we go super heavy stuff? So we started exploring that too, and then making sure that the rules were there to support those things.
Yeah, because from what I've seen, there are playtest rules available for people to have a look at and play around with and see how they feel the game runs. It's not a massive shake-up from the previous or the current edition of Warpath. The command dice have swapped from D8 to D6, and the standard skill dice, for want of a better word, have swapped from D6 to D8. But the rest of it seems to flow still very similarly to how Warpath worked. So it's not a total sea change. Like Firefight was a much bigger change, it feels, than Warpath was, or indeed needs to be.
I certainly didn't consider the existing Warpath rules when obviously I was aware of them, but I didn't make that my starting point. I wanted to make what we did feel congruent with Deadzone and Firefight in the use of D8s, and then with Firefight in the use of command dice and faction orders. So it felt a natural progression from one game system to the other, depending on which scale you were playing in, and it felt, so take some of that Mantic game DNA and make sure it was present in every game. But the point I started from was the epic games I remember playing, back in the day, 30 odd years ago. And that's where I wanted to start. And it was like, well, can I take the best elements of that, add the Mantic DNA into them, improve some things which were perhaps a little clunky at the time and are better now with new mechanics and everything else, and make a game that feels Mantic, feels like Warpath, and feels like the epic scale thing that we wanted, but doesn't feel disconnected from the other games. Does it feel like the next place to go?
It flows from one to the other and iterates quite nicely. It's funny then that you didn't sort of use the original, or not the original, the current Warpath as a starting point, considering how close you've ended up being to that? It feels like a natural progression from Warpath and from the direction that Deadzone and Firefight have both taken of late. It just feels like it works.
And I think that shows that the old Warpath rules, which a lot of people said, felt like an epic war game.
Yeah.
Not like a 28mm war game.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it comes across really nicely in that respect then. So you had initially put up a blog post which encouraged people to have a look at the rules and also to get involved and have a little vote on how best to proceed then for Warpath, which, if we have a look here, you can see it. You can still go in and have a look at Ronnie and yourself having a chat about it, and also pick up the Warpath. I think it's like a 30-page rule set currently. And there's even a community vote on how Mantic should proceed then, which currently just has 4 options in there. Going to hard plastic tooling is obviously the most expensive and resource consuming for Mantic, but then there's also the option for potentially a digital release from the Mantic Vault as well. So before we actually started filming this, Ronnie put a little blog out saying the response so far has been an overwhelming yes. People want to see it. They just have to decide how it's going to be sort of delivered.
Yeah, I think it's, but yeah, I mean, I was expecting some hundreds of responses. It's been probably exceeded my expectations by 6 or 7 times the number of responses we've had.
Okay.
Yes, it's definitely an overwhelming yes. We want this. It's quite split, not quite, almost like a Brexit vote. It's very close.
Very close.
One way or the other. But there's no reason why we couldn't say we went the hard plastic route. There's no reason why we couldn't have some resin support and some STL support as well, rather than going pure STL or pure hard plastic. We could still mix it up. You know, and I don't think we'd probably go. We probably wouldn't invest in all hard plastic anyway. If we went the hard plastic route, it would be, well, here's the enforcer frame, which gives you all of these units. You know, you spam that one over and over and over. You can build up, you know, I don't know, 8 different unit types and vehicles and stuff, and they've got different turrets and stuff on them. But here's your pack of these heavy vehicles, and here's your pack of this elite peacekeeper unit, and you know, here's your flyer pack and all of that stuff. They could be in resin, they could be and or STLs, you know, whatever it is.
Yeah, the interesting thing then is the potential for Warpath in that smaller scale, because it opens up so much more as far as gaming. So if you're playing on a sort of a standard 6x4, and I think a lot of the squads are, a lot of the units are made up of multiple bases, sort of either 6 bases or 3 bases, so you can have this grand scale. But when you drop down to the likes of a 10mm game, it allows you to put things like super heavies, like the enforcer tanks that have been creeping around since day dot in artwork. But potentially then we could see these big constructs on the tabletop that you may not be able to justify or even actually make in 28mm.
Well, it lets us explore and flesh the world and those armies out in a much more efficient and economic way. But then there's no reason why if you know, if that's popular and that world is fleshed out and there's a clamour for it, and enough people are playing Firefight, there's the customer and the player base is there, you can say, okay, well, that's a really popular vehicle or unit in there. Let's redo it in 28mm scale. Let's now take that into Firefight too, because people love it.
Yeah, well, it's one of these things that it's a two-way street that allows things to feed and flow between both systems and scales if the popularity is there behind it. You said you'd looked at 4 factions. Now I know Plague and Enforcers were penciled in for the initial sort of starter set when the concept came out. Is that still the idea then when you take this forward, or will you be exploring other
I think we'd certainly start with those 2. They're the kind of, I guess, our iconic ones. They kind of hark back to Deadzone, that very first Deadzone Kickstarter, which was all about Enforcers and Plague, and that Nexus Psi campaign. So it kind of feels like that's a nice kind of circle there. And then the two that I'd sketched out after that, which and the last thing Alessio had done on this was kind of sketch out a points formula, which we haven't played, but it's assigned points to everything based on their current stats and rules. That obviously all needs playtesting, but he'd done that to the next two lists that haven't been playtested, but I'd written out, which were the Forge Fathers and the Asterians. And then beyond that, I'd kind of half sketched out Marauders, and then I'd looked at maybe we then explore something new, and I looked at doing the Nameless.
Nameless, yeah. Obviously, that will annoy the Rebs players right off the bat that they're not being even name checked here, but they've got to have something to complain about.
Yeah, I mean, the Rebs is quite a tricky one, actually. There's a number of reasons why we haven't done the Rebs. Rebs are mostly rebel cells that aren't a cohesive army, so you kind of have to break the fluff a bit to do that. Yeah. And they are a complete mix of different races, so it's very hard to do a hard plastic for them. You have a tool that's got, well, which races do I put on this? And then I'm just spamming the same ones over again. And you got, it's like, well, I've got 5 different models in here, but every time I run this, they're all going to look very much the same.
Very similar.
And it's quite hard to do. I mean, I'm sure we'll get to it at some point in some fashion, but it's difficult for. I know there's a clamour for it in Firefight, but there's commercial and background reasons why it's not that easy. It's not that I'm deliberately ignoring people.
No, of course not. Why would you be? But Nameless is a fascinating one because, again, another very distinctive, unusual Mantic specific IP, to think of it that way. That they have an interesting look and feel behind them, and so far beyond the Dreadball teams and some Nameless kicking around in a Deadzone and the like, but you haven't really seen what they are and what they're capable of, and having that, I suppose they popped up in Star Saga as well to a certain extent, but having that technological alien race, it's very biomechanical or biological. It opens up a big area to dive into and really explore in a different way.
And because Warpath gives us that ability to explore much larger than Deadzone or Firefight can, we can then suddenly, if we did do Nameless, we could suddenly look at much bigger. What does the Nameless look as a big faction? And then you can take that back into Firefight if again, if the clamour's there, and then back down, redo back into Deadzone. So okay, let's refresh those Deadzone things with the ideas that we've evolved from that where it is now to this end, and then filter it back through again. The one thing we need to always make sure is that they look different enough in terms of how they look and feel to something like the Night Stalkers, because the Night Stalkers have tentacles and stuff creeping into them as well. So you don't want two model ranges that look too similar. You need to keep one I think the Nameless I think they do need some work. They're a little cartoony in some things, but the Night Stalker one needs to stay away from that and just keep them distinct. Otherwise, you get some visual confusion between things. You want to keep everything separate.
With the lists being available and the playtest rules there, are you looking for feedback from the community then on the current iteration of Warpath?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had some people email in with like this, don't like that. I'm expecting this kind of thing in that scale of game, and some of those things. I passed some of those back to Alessio, and he said, "Yeah, I agree with some of that. I don't agree with others." Well, that's just subjective, And so, absolutely. Any feedback like that, as we flesh the game out and take some of that stuff on board. It's the game works as it is now. I'm sure there's some clunky bits in it. I'm sure there's some bits we can find, or there'll be some light bulb moments, and we go, "Oh, we'll just do that then."
Sure.
Any input from the community, and Alessio and I will run playtest days here. When we're a number of games, we can take feedback at the end of each round, if you like. At the end of each game, make some changes, go out and do that. Then now this time round, and it all needs playtesting anyway. With does this points formula work? Does this feel balanced?
Can
all
people
that sort of
break
stuff.
the lists?
Yeah, exactly. There's always needs to do
Always.
destructive testing. Absolutely. Yeah. Literally go out and make the worst list you can. Oh my God, I didn't think anyone would do that. Right. We need to fix that. Yeah.
It's the way it goes. What sort of timescales are you looking at now for Warpath? Because obviously you would have had an initial idea, and then with things being sort of thrown into flux, is that changed the times you're looking at now for sort of getting it out in front of people?
Yeah, I think until we process the community response to it and all of that feedback and all the ideas, then we can go away and say, okay, well, which way do we think is the best based on all of that feedback? What does that mean in terms of our resources, commerciality, or all of that sort of stuff? And then we can build a project and a timeline. So I think until we've had time to process that, I don't know.
It's fair enough. Can't really say fairer than that, but just if people are interested in Warpath, we'll put the links below to the blog so you can go and pick up the playtest rulebook and give it a go. If you haven't already voted, definitely vote on that as well. I have seen a lot of people in the community who are already playing Deadzone and Firefight looking at this as sort of a little bit askew, shall we say. Recently, we've had the command protocols book come out for Firefight that gives the Annihilation sort of gameplay, so that the ability to mechanize your games. Presumably, this was always meant to run in tandem with the existing games. They're not going to be ignored simply for the new kid in town.
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, Deadzone, obviously, well, Warpath doesn't exist so much at the moment anyway. But between Firefight and Deadzone is by far our most popular game, the one that people play the most. So that there's no way we're going to abandon that anytime soon. And if abandoning it would mean a new version anyway, because it's a perennial. It's one of our games. We're aware that sci-fi is a massive genre. We want games in it. We've got our Warpath universe. We'll continue to have games in it. Obviously, in terms of investment, earlier we had a new Deadzone 2 player set, but this year we focused more on Firefight and getting Firefight right. I think it had a great launch, but and it was it was voted Game of the Year. But the Game of the Year can have some things that need addressing. So we've done all of that. We've added all the vehicles in and all of that. So Firefight's had a massive boost this year. And then Deadzone will get that. I mean, there's still some Firefight to come next year, but the Deadzone will get a good look at next year. So there'll be some new stuff coming for Deadzone. The RC have been working on some new stuff, new scenarios, all that sort of thing. And there'll be new faction coming for both games actually next year. In fact, maybe even 2 new factions for Deadzone, possibly.
Cheeky. Right. I think on that note, we'll let people at home start speculating wildly. If you haven't already checked it out, definitely check out Firefight and Deadzone. They are absolutely superb games. And give us your feedback for Warpath, and let Mantic know as well what you think about playing out your games in a grander, more epic scale. Until next time, thank you very much.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.